So, when you think of Vikings, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Probably horned helmets, right? Long ships, brutal raids. But what if I told you their most powerful legacy wasn't forged in fire, but was actually captured in ink? Well, today we're diving into the incredible stories behind one of history's most misunderstood peoples, the great Icelandic Sagas.
Just listen to that. That was the absolutely horrified reaction from a scholar named Alcuin of York, and he was talking about the Viking raid on the holy island of Lindisfarne. This one event just brutally announced the start of the Viking Age and totally cemented their terrifying reputation all across Europe.
And that's really the journey we're on today. We're going from the axe to the quill, from the battlefield right to the bookshelf. We are exploring the world of the great Icelandic sagas.
Okay, so to really get their stories, we first have to understand their world. Let's set the stage for what we call the Age of the Northmen.
The Viking Age. This wasn't some brief flash in the pan. We're talking about nearly 3 full centuries. It kind of gets bookended by that famous raid on Lindisfarne on one side and a final failed invasion of England in 1066 on the other. But the time in between? That's when these seafaring Northmen just exploded out of Scandinavia and dramatically reshaped the map of Europe and, well, beyond.
But what drove them from their homes? Was it really just a thirst for plunder? And what actually happened when they reached foreign shores? The reality, as you're about to see, is way more complex than that simple raider stereotype.
It really wasn't just one thing. It was this perfect storm of pressures at home and huge opportunities abroad. Scandinavia was getting crowded, good farmland was getting scarce, and powerful kings like Harald Fairhair in Norway were starting to consolidate power, which pushed out a lot of rival chieftains. Now you add to that the invention of the incredible longship and the temptation of all these wealthy, poorly defended monasteries, and you've got the perfect recipe for the Viking expansion.
And this is where that raider stereotype just completely falls apart. The Vikings were also incredibly savvy traders. They established these routes that stretched all the way from their homelands to Constantinople. They were pioneers who settled some of the absolute harshest landscapes on Earth. And they were founders of cities and states like Dublin and Normandy that still exist today.
All right, so let's zoom in on that settler part for a minute. Because one of their most unique settlements, this remote island way out in the North Atlantic, became the unlikely crucible for one of the world's great literary traditions.
Can you imagine just leaving everything you know to sail out into the complete unknown? That is exactly what thousands of Norwegians did, looking for freedom from a king who was centralizing all the power. And they found it on this remote volcanic island where they set up a whole new society, a commonwealth, totally independent of any mainland king.
And in this really isolated world, stories became currency. The great deeds, the bitter disputes, the complex family histories of those first settlers, all of it was passed down orally from one generation to the next, kept alive around firesides for hundreds of years.
And that brings us to the sagas. Because after centuries of being passed down just by word of mouth, these stories were finally written down, creating this literary treasure that gives us an absolutely unparalleled window into the Viking mind.
So what exactly is a saga? Well, think of it less like a fantasy epic and more like gritty historical fiction, maybe even an early version of a prestige TV drama. These are prose stories about real families, their bitter feuds, their complex legal battles. For example, in Eagle's Saga, we follow this brilliant but really violent poet-warrior through his family's multi-generational feud with the King of Norway. No dragons or magic swords here, nope, just the raw human drama of early Icelandic life.
But here's the crucial detail, and this is what just blows my mind. Notice the timeline. The events of the sagas, they happened during the peak of the Viking Age, but they weren't actually written down until the 13th and 14th centuries. That means for hundreds of years, these incredibly complex family histories and epic feuds existed only in the memories of storytellers.
It's also really important to tell the sagas apart from another famous set of Norse texts, the Eddas. And the distinction is actually pretty simple. Sagas are about people. Farmers, chieftains, outlaws, just trying to navigate their world. The Eddas, on the other hand, are about the gods, Odin, Thor, and Loki shaping that world. One is historical drama, the other is mythology.
But of course, the world of the sagas and the world of the myths were deeply connected. The beliefs described in the Eddas, they formed the entire worldview of the saga heroes, and their combined legacy is still all around us today. Figures like Odin, the Allfather, king of the gods, he formed the cultural backdrop for everyone in the Viking Age.
In fact, the man who recorded so much of this mythology in what's called the Prose Edda was Snorri Sturluson, a brilliant Icelandic chieftain and historian, who many scholars believe also wrote one of the greatest sagas, Egil's Saga.
And the cultural impact of this world is so deep, it's embedded in our everyday language. Ever wonder where the names for our days of the week come from? They are not random. They're a direct inheritance from the Norse gods. Tuesday is Tyr's Day, Wednesday is Woden's or Odin's Day, Thursday is, of course, Thor's Day, and Friday belongs to the goddess Frigga.
And this influence, it didn't just stop in the Middle Ages. That same world of stoic heroes, epic conflicts, and this sense of a looming fate, it echoed down the centuries, providing direct inspiration for modern fantasy. In fact, if you've ever read The Lord of the Rings, you have experienced the legacy of the sagas. J.R.R. Tolkien was a deep scholar of this material, and Middle-earth is just steeped in its influence.
So the next time you picture a Viking, remember this. They valued their history so much they preserved it in memory for generations before it was ever written down. Their most enduring legacy wasn't forged in fire, it was captured in ink. Which kind of leaves us with a question for our own, more fleeting digital age. Thanks for tuning in.